One of my favorite aspects about the professional wrestling world is its storytelling ability. Some of the best stories in entertainment history have taken place in a wrestling ring, and that's why at various points of its lifespan, wrestling was genuinely mainstream. To see these characters go through their doubts and struggles and overcome them is absolutely fantastic to watch, especially given the fact that most likely you've been watching them rise up to that occasion for years and years. It's something that the wrestling world has above any form of entertainment. The fact that you watch these athletes go through this for years, slowly rising up the card, slowly going to the top, and I feel like no story exemplifies this more than the underdog story. An underdog story is something that's in all forms of entertainment. It really makes you feel, it makes you passionate because you want to cheer for the underdog. It's basic, but that's because it's effective, and I feel like no profession does it better than professional wrestling. Wrestling is something that has used the underdog story to its advantage on several occasions. I think back to Kofimania, I think back to the Yes Movement, I think back to Hangman Page's world title win. It's these moments that make you a wrestling fan, watching these characters go through their struggles, their doubts, and overcome them and become world champions, going against factions or even companies or bosses and overcoming the odds every single time. That's what I love about professional wrestling, these type of stories, and the underdog story is the perfect example of why professional wrestling is so great. It's really one of the biggest advantages of wrestling being scripted. You can tell these type of stories without fear that they'll go wrong, because you have the pen. You can dictate what happens, and when it happens, when you build up to it for months and months or even years, then it's euphoric for the audience. After all of that waiting to finally see their guy or girl reach the top of the mountain, become a world champion at the biggest show. It's happened time and time again. I mentioned the Yes Movement. The Yes Movement was a movement that was created by the fans, but the WWE went along with it when they realized they could not stop it, and it was one of the greatest moments in company history when Bryan won the gold at WrestleMania, in one of the best stories in company history too. Kofimania is another example where this time Bryan was the villain, and Kofi Kingston, after a decade of fighting and clawing his way to the top, finally became a world champion. I mentioned Hangman Page. Years of slowly getting worse as his friends betrayed him, his drinking got worse, his opinion of himself got worse, and then as time went by, he made new friends, he gained confidence in himself, he stood up to his old friends, and he became world champion against all odds. This is something you can only do in professional wrestling, because let's be honest, it's not the way the real world works. You can't really do this in other sports. There are underdog stories, but not to this level. This would have been a collapse with Hangman Page. He would have been a what if in the world of whatever sport he was in, but because it's professional wrestling, he reached the very top of the mountain and he became an absolute star. Same for Kofi Kingston, same for Bryan. I mentioned these three stories specifically because they do show a flaw with the underdog story. With all three examples I mentioned, the reign after they reached the top wasn't really ideal. With Bryan, there was an excuse. He got a severe injury that was the beginning of the end for him, at least temporarily. Kofi Kingston, there's no excuse. His reign was booked terribly, and after he lost that title in an embarrassing fashion, he fell down the card and it felt like it never happened. And Hangman Page was overshadowed by the likes of CM Punk and Bryan Danielson, and the stories he was in just weren't really very good. This is a flaw. It's something that the wrestling world has to fix, and it's not every single underdog story. Sometimes they work well, but most of the time the chase is better than the reign. Once you get to that point, you don't really know what to do anymore if you're the big company. But you have to find a way to make it work. You have to find a way to add more struggles, add more doubts, and then use those while also using the fact that they've become a better person due to their previous doubts to make a good story. Build up challengers to go after the champ, to make the champ seriously doubt themselves. Don't use filler. Don't just extend the reign artificially. You have to have a proper story to make it investing. Overall, This is one of the best stories that any wrestling company could make. There are flaws such as the epilogue of the world title victory and the fact that sometimes it can feel very forced and that makes it not work at all, like Roman Reigns in 2015. But if it's natural and if you have a plan for the world title reign that's actually good, then you can have an all-timer moment and make a new megastar.